Across the Park podcast is proud to be sponsored by Globe Gas and Heating. For the best kitchen and bathroom renovations, boiler servicing and repair, and central and underfloor heating in the Northwest, head over to globecentralheating.com and quote Across the Park for a free quote. Hello, welcome back to Across the Park podcast and what is looking to be a huge week for Everton Football Club. Let's hope there's a button being pressed that says reset on it and this is the start and everything's going to look better in the future, but it is Everton. So Judgy, in one of his many holiday homes, always gives me a chance to invite guests in, and I'm really fortunate this week. Someone I'm a really big fan of, and I've cased him to come on the show and he's agreed. Paddy Boyland, the Everton correspondent for Athletic. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. Obviously been a mad few days, but finally some green shoots of recovery.
It looks more positive. It's feeling that way.
It does.
Feeling that way. So I want to get your opinion as an Evertonian on a couple of things, including, but I would be a fool to not attack the journalist here. Okay, so we'll get some intel from you if you don't mind. Yeah. The Freidkin group, they go away. They publicly go away. They don't want to know. There's rumours as to why, but they're very public and they've moved away. John Textor is extremely public in that he wants to control the football club. Yesterday, the Freidkin group have agreed a deal with Farhad Moshiri, seemingly out of nowhere. What's been going on?
Yeah, I mean, probably the end to Farhad Moshiri's tenure that we would have expected, in the sense that it's been chaotic, it's been full of twists and turns, totally in keeping with everything else in his kind of 7-8 years at the helm. I think the first thing to say is that while the Freidkin group did walk away quite publicly and that period of exclusivity ended, they were always still involved in Everton. They were always significant stakeholders in the sense that they'd put 200 million into the club in the form of a loan. That meant that for there to be any change of control, any takeover, they needed to be consulted, they needed to agree, and that 200 million needed to be repaid. They were insistent on that as part of any potential takeover bid and as part of their loan. And from what we were told, John Textor was pushing for a deal, but there was no sign that he was going to be able to shift his Crystal Palace shares anytime soon. Farhad Moshiri, as we know, and has been well documented, wanted a way out and has done for some time. And during the conversations with the club and with other stakeholders, it quickly became apparent again to the Freidkin group that there was a deal to be done here and potentially a deal to be done on even more favourable terms to them than last time. I think the big thing that shifted, the big impediment the first time around as we reported it, was that 777's court cases in the US put people on edge. Potential buyers were worried where it would lead and how it could be resolved.
Okay.
Groups close to Farhad and close to the Freidkin group have since consulted lawyers, legal experts, and have found what they believe to be a workaround to solve that potential issue. There's an agreement in place with ACAP, there's an agreement in place with Rights and Media Funding, another lender. And that, in theory, should the court actually formally agree to it now, that in theory paves the way for that issue to be cleared. And that was the only big impediment really for the Freidkin group. They were all in on Everton otherwise. They liked the club, they saw potential in the new stadium. They actually have been positive about quite a lot of the work that's been going on behind the scenes in very difficult circumstances. So it was never a huge surprise. It was always bubbling away in the background. And anybody that follows my stuff will know that there have been loads of question marks over John Textor. I actually found some of what he was saying in public to be concerning, a bit of a red flag. We are where we are now. We probably have the most viable and logical solution for Everton as it stands.
And that's the most un-Everton thing ever for an Evertonian to say to another Evertonian about this football club. But like I said, I'm hoping it's a reset and I'm hoping brighter days are coming in. What do you know about them? I know as a journalist, you've probably looked into them. They own Roma. They seemingly are hands-on with Roma. They've just dismissed the coach. Because they own Roma, are they going to have to split their time? Do you expect multiple people coming over to run Everton? What do you expect from the group coming in, if they do?
So it's always stressed to us that this is not Dan Freidkin taking over Everton. It's the Freidkin group, and therefore it's family members, his son Ryan, who's heavily involved in Roma. It's other executives within the business. And this is $1 billion, $6 billion, $10 billion business that they have assets not only in the car industry with Toyota famously in Texas in the US, but they also have film studios. Dan Freidkin is big into aviation. They have hotels, they have hospitality businesses. So it's a big sprawling enterprise where the headquarters are in Houston, Texas, but it actually extends, the tentacles extend all over North America and further. I suppose they first started to dip their toe in the water in sport with AS Roma, and that's the big case study here. And even though we've not got loads of information, we're going off 3-4 years, and certainly it's been a bit of a learning process for them. They hired Jose Mourinho as the big Hollywood appointment, and maybe that Hollywood appointment will send shivers down the spine of some Evertonians after
Ronald Koeman, wasn't it? The Hollywood appointment.
And Carlo Ancelotti.
Of course,
I mean, that didn't turn out as badly as Koeman, obviously. But it's been a bit of a learning curve for them. What I would say is that they've invested heavily. I mean, some estimates suggest that they've already put about €1 billion into Roma in that 3-4 year period. Roma have had financial issues themselves. They started before the Freidkin group came in, and the Freidkin group have tried to curb those. And then more recently, we've obviously had Daniele De Rossi sacked just 4 games into the Serie A season, much to the disgruntlement of the Roma ultras, if you can call them that. So there were protests at the weekend before we were recording here. As a result of those protests, the Roma CEO stepped down. So there are issues. There are question marks, and I think it's incumbent on us as Evertonians, but especially myself as a journalist, to look below the bonnet here, to use a car metaphor with the Freidkin group. You've got to make sure that they are the right incumbents for Everton. My sense is that if you line up all the options that have been on the table here so far, so let's start with 777 partners. Shivers, right? And then you also go on to John Textor as well. Of those 3 groups, the Freidkins at least have a history of investment, heavy investment into Roma. They have proven track record in business through the automobile industry and others. And they see the promise for Everton Football Club. They are here and able to do a deal right now and are effectively guaranteeing Farhad Moshiri less money for his shares than Textor, but that the club will have a completed stadium, that the debt, which is really important here, Everton's kind of crippling short-term, high-interest bearing debt, that will be reduced on day one of the purchase.
What's the story behind that? Because a lot of people have tweeted, a lot of people have spoke, and there's so many conflicting stories in relation to the debt. Now, what is your understanding? Because the rights and media funding, from what I understand, has a really high APR rate, and it's not good for Everton's books. The 777 one, it just looks like a stain on the books. Are these just being reduced, or are these being taken care of completely? What's your understanding of the loans that Everton have?
So if we look at where we are right now as opposed to where we will be, that right to media funding loan gets paid off in part every single year. It reduces, even with the high interest, they're entitled effectively, as we understand it, to some of Everton's transfer profits, for example. So when you look at how much money Everton have brought in transfers over the last 4 to 5 years, you can quite easily see how that money loan sum has started to come down. The Freidkin Group has, we believe, agreements with all of these creditors. You need those agreements in place. And obviously one big one is right to media funding. They've committed, at least in part, to paying down that and potentially paying off in full. We've not been told which one of those two it will be right now. So that was somewhere at around 200 million by last estimate. But the Freidkin Group are committing on day one to significantly reducing that amount, which is big positive for Everton.
Yes.
In theory, should it happen. They themselves, as we've spoken about before, the Freidkin Group, they've already put in £200 million. One of the reasons why I think this really does make sense for Everton is that that 200 million can be turned into equity. It doesn't have to sit on the books as debt. Whereas if somebody else had taken it over, they would have had to pay the Freidkin Group off. That's another 200 million you need to find. So in essence, right now, I would look at that £200 million and say, that's debt right now, but should this takeover take place, we can basically scrub that from the books. And a little bit with how we've done with Farhad Moshiri's interest-free loans, shareholder loans to the club. You've got a few other smaller bits. Metro Bank had a much, much smaller in the tens of millions loan in the club. But the two key pillars, as I saw them, were the Freidkin Group and rights and media funding. And what we should end up with is a situation where Everton's debt position is much, much healthier should this takeover take place. And I think that's one of the reasons why ultimately people at the club are happy we're in this position right now.
Well, what you're saying makes me extremely happy, because I don't know at what point as a football fan I had to buy a calculator and figure out when accounts were going in.
Same for me as a journalist.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. I got in this to cover every lick and spit on the football pitch, what happens in the 90 minutes, the choices a manager makes, transfers, all that kind of stuff, the tactical side of the game. And yet the last 2, 3, 4 years for all of us as journalists, you guys as fans, we've all had to concern ourselves with
interest payments and stuff.
I've had to do an interest payments course for dummies, effectively, to get where I am. But I mean, now I don't particularly get concerned about pouring over Everton's accounts, because in this job we do it every single year, and when PSR comes up, it might be daunting to some reporters, but as we know, we've been in this position for a long time now, Everton, and those PSR issues are well known, the protocols, the rules and regulations are there, and we all kind of know them pretty well by now. So this has been our existence for the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm really looking forward to fans being able to hopefully forget about those existential concerns, forget about like the accountancy and ownership struggles, and then go back to Goodison and talk about, isn't Illingham Die great? Doesn't Jesper Lindstrom look promising? What's Harrison Armstrong going to turn out like? You know, all the things that we actually got into
football
this to watch.
Should be talking about,
Yeah, exactly.
One last question on the Freidkin Group before we do move on a little bit. And it's a very simple question, is if this takeover is complete, and what I'm hearing from outlets like Sky Sports this morning, they had Vinny O'Connor and Finch Farm, who said it could be weeks, not months. Does that affect Everton in the January transfer window? Is there enough time for Everton maybe to smartly spend some money?
Well, what we have to remember is that the Freidkin Group's representatives have already met key figures at Everton. As part of their due diligence, they had those meetings. Yes. They discussed what potential strategy would look like, how they could work together. We understand that those talks were productive, and there was a sense that it was the right thing for Everton moving forward. And that's why there's lots of optimism around this takeover right now. But what it means is that they're not coming in with zero knowledge. They've seen the books. They know what the financial situation is. Because this deal has been agreed in September, we're still months out from a January transfer window and then a summer transfer window. So it gives people time to plan for what's going to come. Now, we can't make any promises here. There's still a PSR issue where Everton have to be a little bit careful with how they spend and the money they recoup. That's not going to change overnight. But it gives certainly Kevin Thelwell and the recruitment team below him an opportunity to look at what can be done with more money. The belief at Everton's always been that the one thing we need to get back to competing again, apart from smart decision making, is some more capital. I mean, we have kind of consistently reported that over the last 5 years, Everton are now the only team in the Premier League to have a positive transfer balance in that time. I think they're spending about 60%, according to Kevin Thelwell's estimates of their rivals. Even people like Brighton are vastly eclipsing them in the market. So they need a fighting chance, and the sooner that money comes in, the better. Now, it would be wrong for Thelwell and others at the club now to speculate on the basis of a takeover that is 90% likely to happen, but there's still a small percent chance it doesn't. But they can start making plans in case it does. And I think that's a real positive, because the last 2, 3, 4 windows, it's been a case of recouping what they can to resolve PSR, recouping what they can to balance the books and to keep the lights on, and then by hook or by crook strengthening the squad in any way they can. Everybody knows. I mean, we've reported ourselves, and I think that quickly took off on social media. This idea that Everton, I think, have got 12 contracted players beyond this season.
Yeah, scary.
So finance is going to be needed, and this is the opportune time for new investors to come in with new money, fresh cash, and fresh ideas, and give Kevin Thelwell and that recruitment staff a fighting chance, because they haven't had it.
Just listening to you there, I did say that was the last question, but I've just, sorry, on the Freidkin group, but there seems to be a big to-do list. You come in, you mentioned there that player contracts, and if you don't offer certain players new contracts or they don't commit to players to signing contracts, you could possibly go into pre-season really, really weak. There's a manager out of contract, a director of football out of contract. There's the big shiny beacon of hope not far from here that hasn't had naming rights upon it yet, which is up for grabs. There's stuff to do. Where do you see them starting? What have they got to go in on day one? Have they got to be aggressive in how they try and turn things around?
Absolutely. I mean, let's start with the manager and the director of football, kind of two key pillars at any Premier League club, at any football club in general. Both of those two, as you correctly point out, are out of contract as it stands at the end of the season. So you would want swift decisions on both of them, whichever way they fall, I would argue. I tend to think, actually, that Kevin Thelwell's future is more important than Sean Dyche's. In these modern structures where a director of football oversees everything at a club in a sporting sense, they are the figures of permanence. They're the ones that make the appointments.
Yeah.
Technically, Kevin Thelwell should be Sean Dyche's boss.
Yes.
His line manager, if you want to call it that. And he is the one that oversees everything from recruitment strategy to what's going on in the academy, what's going on in sports science and medical, all these different spheres that support the first team. So I would argue that's more important even than Sean Dyche's future. But Dyche's future is symbolic too, and they're going to need to make decisions. I mean, the really interesting thing now is that Everton have not necessarily always been in a position where they can hire and fire easily. Even when they appointed Sean Dyche, my understanding was that there was no money to buy somebody out of a contract. It had to be somebody that was unemployed and out of a job. Such was the financial situation at the club. But if the Freidkins come in, they may want to put their own stamp on it. They may decide that they want to go in a certain direction and they want a certain kind of manager or a certain kind of director of football, and they will almost certainly have the finance, if they want, to go and take. And this is just a pluck a name out of the hat, the best young manager in the Championship, whoever that may be, or the best young manager in Italy or Spain. Completely hypothetically, they could do that. So it opens up loads more avenues. I think they need to start there. I think they need to start with the football situation. What's happening with Thelwell? What's happening with Dyche? Can they do any business in January to help improve a squad that is, if we're being honest, threadbare in some places? That needs improvement. An immediate one for me. Anybody that knows me, I bang on and on about Everton's fullbacks. That to me looks to be a position of need still. I still look at some of the other positions, maybe another winger with a bit of pace and goal scoring quality. There's lots to do, as you point out, and that's before we even touch on investing in the academy and everything else. So that's the football side. Like, you're also right to point to Bramley Moore and the need for those big sponsorship deals.
Getting that right.
Getting it right, getting the transition right, getting a naming rights partner in place. That's proven tricky for Spurs, by the way. So it's not a given. But can the Freidkin group pull on some of their connections? Could it be the Toyota Stadium, for example? I don't know. We would have to ask that question. We already know, of course, that there have been other big commercial deals already signed, where people like Castor and several others, Christopher Ward, the watch, and sleeve sponsor, they've become founding partners of the new stadium. So Bramley Moore is already paying dividends for Everton financially. They're already growing commercial revenues as a result. But that needs to, the big one there, the key strand is the stadium naming rights. So lots of work to do, lots that needs to be done. But at the very least, there is the prospect of fresh ideas, fresh capital and fresh impetus coming in to give Everton that fighting chance I spoke of.
can't touch wood here, so I'll touch my head. If the takeover goes through, which as a fan I personally do hope it does do, it will bring to an end the Farhad Moshiri era. If I look back, I was trying to take some notes before, but there was hiring and firings of managers. There was rumours of players being sent in by different agents who maybe weren't the coach's picks. There was chaos. There was protests. I've never seen a protest at the ground on a Wednesday night in winter before. Everton seemed to do that well. It was just chaotic. And the financial situation the football club is in, I said last year, this might sound a bit too much to you, I said it's on its knees. Yeah. It's staring it down a barrel. However, I drive past the most amazing new stadium that is going to hopefully transform how my little boy and little girl watch Everton going forwards, and he's responsible for that. Yeah. So when you look back at the Farhad Moshiri era, have you got a better word than chaotic?
I haven't. They all tend to be synonyms of chaotic. We go for turbulent and chaotic, surprising, disastrous, all those kind of words. I do think ultimately we will look back on this as a huge missed opportunity because he's invested enough for the situation to be very different. Mm-hmm. If that money had been invested wisely, Everton really could have gone somewhere. They could have, in effect, be where Aston Villa are now, in my opinion, on the strength of the funding early into Farhad Moshiri's tenure. But as we all know, there was never a strategy in place. It was completely scattergun. We go from one extreme of a manager and his tactical style to another. Mm-hmm. We'd have directors of football and managers sacked or walking away. Times when other people at the club went on board with appointments and then he pulled rank. Players brought in that people weren't particularly keen on elsewhere in the club. All that kind of stuff. So it was turbulent. What I'd say is, I've written a column today on this for The Athletic. What I'd say is I give Farhad Moshiri credit for two things. The first one is the new stadium. Mm-hmm. As you point out, he funded most of the early stages of that in very challenging financial conditions himself, out of his own pocket. So he's kept that going more. Like, without him, the stadium doesn't happen. Yes. Pure and simple. That's been a millstone around Everton's neck financially in recent years because they've had to take on loans for it. But whenever we speak to potential investors about Everton and the promise of Everton, the one thing they always touch on is the promise of the new stadium. Mm-hmm. So it's probably saved them as well, in essence. So he deserves credit for that. And he also deserves credit, I think, for going back to what we mentioned earlier with the Freidkin group. In this case, going with an offer that makes more sense for Everton than for him. Mm-hmm. It works better for Everton. He gets less money than he would have done with John Textor, as we understand it. So there's two positives from him. I try to be... A reporter's job is to be fair and balanced. Yes. We make our points. We can be critical. We try to be constructively critical. But we also look at some of the things that he might have done a little bit better. And I think here we have to say the stadium and the potential takeover from the Freidkin group, we kind of got there eventually in those two areas.
As always with Everton, the football side can now be discussed secondary to the off-the-pitch stuff. We're going to move on. Bit of panic is setting amongst certain supporters, and I understand why. We had a chat off mic there, and we've been through a lot. And I think we all know as fans, due to great journalists like yourself with the insightful information, we all know what relegation would do to our football club. So I think there's a fear, and fear makes people act in different ways. In this section of the fan base right now, I sense genuine fear of where Everton are because of the start of the season. However, it is just a start to a season. Mm-hmm. Are you worried, or do you think Everton can improve and get some points on the board and just get away from danger?
I have been concerned by some elements of the start, predominantly because some of the strengths of this team and this manager seem to have fallen by the wayside. Yeah. So we one of the things we would always speak about with Sean Dyche was that he set up his sides to be stubborn, compact, defensively resilient. And I don't think we've seen any of that so far this season. Everton have gone from having one of the best defensive records in the league last time around. I think it was fourth best to the joint worst at the time of recording after 5 games of this campaign. They've also done something that his teams don't usually do, which is squander a load of leads and show that kind of fragility mentally. as well as everything else. So I have seen some concerning patterns, and clearly nobody wants Everton to be winless after 5 matches. The question I would pose here is there long enough in this season to turn it around? And the answer there is obviously yes.
Yeah.
If Everton had started with 5 wins, would we be talking about them sweeping all before them and winning the league? Well, we wouldn't, because it's a really small sample size. And nobody's downplaying that the start, it's been bad. It's been dismal at times, as I've written. But I think we have to bear that in mind. I think we have to keep that perspective. And we also have to realise that actually this run coming up is really pivotal now.
Yes.
The start of the season, objectively and subjectively, was tough. You put in away trips to Villa and Spurs with a home game against the resurgent Brighton. And that, to me, is on the more difficult side in the Premier League. What we know now is that, in theory, there are winnable games coming up, but they're going to have to win those, and they're going to have to get players back. Jared Branthwaite, they're going to have to integrate new signings quickly and get them up to speed. I am seeing some positives in attack. I actually thought the first half performance against Leicester was Everton's best of the season so far,
good,
in terms of control, in terms of the variety in their play, keeping the ball, constructing moves. That they were more solid in the middle of the park, that they had more pace out wide with Lindstrom, caused Leicester real problems, admittedly against the promoted team. But they're still not where we would want them to be. And they need to get points on the board now, because, as we mentioned off air, there's a tricky December coming up, a very, very tricky December coming up. So it's time now to accelerate things. It's time to get things going. I'm just hoping that the lift that everybody has had, the fan base and staff, from the Freidkin situation this week, is the boost everybody needs to go to Goodison on Saturday. Bit of revitalisation, and everyone to kind of look forward to that game and probably get the first 3 points of the season.
I done a show yesterday. We do the away fan review. So I done a show with a Leicester fan yesterday, and he asked me a question, and I found myself answering it. You know when you're honest, you answer straight away. And he said, "Is Palace must win?" I said, "Yes." And then I thought, I don't want to heap that much pressure on myself going into that game, a little boy, and everyone watching this. But do you get why Palace? I do feel it's a must win. I feel that the game after it, being Newcastle, is a tougher game. And if you don't win this Saturday, the likelihood is we've had 2 international breaks with no wins.
I think they need a win from somewhere.
Yeah.
In my eyes, they need to win at least one of these next 2. Basically, going off what we've spoken about there with the fixture list as it is now and what it's going to be in December, this is the period where Everton need to pick up and start taking points. That would start to calm nerves, calm fears.
100%.
Because I think what we've got, going back to the issue of this being a very small block of games at the start of the campaign, we're not just looking at that in isolation. The context that's come before is 3 successive years of relegation battles.
Yeah.
And fans, I think, went into this campaign eager to see those days behind them. What they've had instead is that nagging fear, as things have got worse and worse this season, that there's going to be a 4th relegation battle on the spin.
Yeah.
And I think we're all sick of that, aren't we, frankly? Whether we're fans, whether I'm speaking as a fan, somebody who grew up supporting the club, or somebody as a journalist now in my current capacity. In both of those ways, I am utterly sick of Everton being in relegation battles. So we were all hoping for an indication that Everton would be out of that, but we've not got the evidence yet. So I think what a win or 2 would do is start to calm those fears down. It would get everyone back to a position where they think that this hasn't been a great start, but there's enough here for Everton to meet bottom lines at the very least, and then build. I still look at the squad, particularly when Jared Branthwaite's fit, when Illiman dies fully up to speed, and when the midfield starts to solidify a little bit. Yeah, that still to me doesn't look like a relegation team. It to me it looks like a lower mid-table squad, really. And I think ultimately that's where Everton should and probably will end up.
No, I agree. When I looked at the squad, and I think there was excitement by how we navigated through the window. With it looked to be a clever strategy that we sold one big player and we quickly invested it. And Sean Dyche had players in pre-season, new players to work with, and I think the Bournemouth one is that's the lingering one. That's like a really bad experience where, and again, the fear for me is I seen it a little bit on Saturday. I think what you're saying with if Everton win, it'll calm a lot of fans down. I think it'll calm the teams down. I think they seem to panic at times. When Leicester went 1-1, I mean, I sit in the park ends for the Bournemouth one. I saw that up front, the goalkeeper and the defenders were all out. They were panicking. They were absolutely panicking.
You felt it in the stadium as well, though, didn't you?
Of course.
There was an idea. Every Evertonian will have turned around when, I think it was Semenyo scored Bournemouth's first goal, and we're going to either draw or lose this. Like, more or less to a person, they'll have said something like that. I have to be honest, by the way, when Mavididi equalised on Saturday for Leicester, I'm thinking in my head that's finishing 2-1 Leicester.
Yeah.
So small mercies, it didn't.
Yeah.
And that's some very small, I think Dyche called it a mini step forward, that they were able to get their first point of the season. The big issue for Everton, as I see it, is that they've not found a way of taking the sting out of games, of managing games. They've not been good enough doing that. Yeah. And that's not just the players on the pitch, that's the manager. It's sometimes he's not making enough substitutions in what I would consider to be a tired-looking team at times. Bournemouth, some of those players looked out on their feet, even though Dyche rejects that, by the way. I still think if you look at the goals back and you look at players like Tim Irabunam, for example, they looked exhausted and needed fresh legs. Other times he's bringing subs on, for example, like Beto, and they're losing a kind of focal point at the top end of the pitch when Calvert-Lewin goes off. Jack Harrison for Jesper Lindstrom, I think, on Saturday, I understood it at the time, just because of what Lindstrom had done and on his first start in the Premier League. But they lacked an outball after that point. I didn't particularly agree, by the way, with... I'm not a manager, so I'm not a coach, but I didn't particularly agree with Irabunam coming on deeper and taking Decore out and putting him in the number 10. I thought the midfield suffered after that. So it's not only on Dyche, it's on the players too to manage. There's a lot of experience on that pitch when you go through. But collectively, they're not doing it. Yeah. And I think that's the fear for me at the moment. The fear is that they're not able to get through games, see them out, manage them well enough. Yeah. Sometimes you can't just bang the ball up front for 90 minutes. You need to be clever. You need to win free kicks in the corner. You need to keep hold of possession. Yeah. You need to take the sting out of games, draw fouls, all that kind of stuff. But Everton just seem to retreat and just invite teams on, and then we almost wait for the inevitable sucker punch.
I feel like the substitutions in the past few games have made us go deeper. The team, and naturally with those new players on the pitch, they go deeper, and all that does is bring the opposition on. I mean, the Bournemouth one was key. We lost an outlet with Enzai. The ball stopped sticking because Loom, and all of a sudden you see in the back forward and the keeper going, can we stop these crosses somehow, because we're onto... So it's a lot of food for thought. I've got one question for you before we move on to our socials. We have got some good questions for you. Do you think there's a chance Jarrad Branthwaite makes Saturday? He's just played under 21s. Is that enough for Sean Dyche to bring him back in, do you think?
I think he's closer than Nathan Patterson.
Okay.
Purely because he played 90 minutes compared to, I think it was around 60 for Patterson for the under 21s on Sunday against Sunderland.
And that would be a booster team sheet.
Massive. I mean, we speak a lot, don't we, about the defence and what's been going wrong so far this season. In terms of one single player, I think he's the biggest difference maker in that squad.
100%.
In terms of what he can bring to the defence. I think he gets more out of James Tarkowski because he allows Tarkowski to focus on his strengths, which is, if we're being honest, attacking the ball, being aggressive, all those kinds of things. I think he improves Vitaly Mykolenko because he gives Mykolenko that assurance that he'll be around to cover when Mykolenko goes forward. I think it calms everybody down.
Yeah, you're right.
So getting him back, not just rushing him back, by the way, but getting him back permanently so he can play regular games is key. He's a lot closer than he was because of that 90 minutes against Sunderland. He looked good, made a really important last-ditch tackle on the line to prevent Sunderland from equalising at the end. It's going to be interesting to see whether Dyche throws him in, but I think he will be in and around it for Saturday, certainly. And as soon as he is 100% ready in Dyche's eyes, he will come back into that team.
Got to, yeah.
He has to. Patterson's a bit further away when you think about how long Branthwaite's been out for. Basically, I think he underwent minor surgery.
It was Chelsea, Patterson, wasn't it? In April.
Patterson was April. Branthwaite's minor surgery on his groin was June, July time. So Patterson's been out for a lot longer and it will take him more time. I think the next step for Patterson will probably be another under 21s game or a behind closed doors game if they can find one. But Branthwaite coming back would be huge.
We've got a question about behind closed doors games. We put this, our Twitter is Across the Park PC, so thank you for everybody. We couldn't get all the questions in. I've tried to fit a few of them in just with how I'm talking there about spending in January, but I always ask our guest questions, and every time we get a guest, we've got a Twitter follower called Manny, and he always asks the same question, and he's going to make me ask a vegetarian at one day, and I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
Red or brown and a sausage on toast.
Right, well, you're lucky I'm not a vegetarian, so I can't answer the question. What was it? Sausage on
toast, red or brown sauce?
Brown sauce, and then bacon, it's tomato, and then if it's both, it's tomato.
Nice, okay.
I'll get pelters for that now.
Our comments are just going to be lit.
It's the new pineapple on pizza, isn't it?
It is. It definitely is. Again on Twitter, Maka, and this is the question about behind closed doors. He said, does Paddy know the latest on Delhi? It was a month ago that the manager said that Delhi would be playing behind closed doors games so we can have a look at his fitness. Has that happened, or is Delhi not there yet?
Not to my knowledge. If it has, that's what I would say. The difference between, say, Delhi and Patterson and Branthwaite is that he's not contracted as it stands, and therefore he can't play in any competitive fixture, whether it's under 21s or Premier League. That's a bit of a barrier, truth be told, because it means then you're reliant on him making his way through training and then playing in a behind closed doors game. The question is right. The idea is that in theory he could play in behind closed doors games. He is in training and he is training with the first team, but I think they're starting to be very careful given how long he's been out for, that there's no setback. And otherwise the door's open to him for a new contract. An agreement's in place with Tottenham, which waives the initial lump sum that would have been due to Spurs had he re-signed a deal at Everton. There have been positive talks with Delhi's representatives, and that means that in theory there's a deal to do there for a new contract. But I think the impediment right now, the thing that's holding this back from getting it over the line, is that there's not enough evidence of Delhi yet putting the training schedule together and then playing in behind closed doors games. That's the next big step that we need to see for it to come off.
Okay, again on Twitter we had Kirsty, and she said, it's a bit of a question just for you as a journalist. What was it like covering the games in lockdown in the stadiums with no fans? Completely
soulless. I mean, I'd never lose sight of the fact that I'm privileged to be in this job, and particularly during lockdown when everybody was kind of in their own homes watching these games on TV and on streams. I'm there in the stadium covering them, but you'd see the most amazing thing from James Rodriguez, for example, but it just felt like it meant less because you didn't have the crowd buzzing off it. And I think one of the things I regret most about that period, and one of the things I'm sure James regrets most, is that the fans weren't there to take joy in what he's doing, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? Like seeing him, like, you do just ridiculous things like that goal against Leicester at home, where Everton, I think they needed a win to go up to fourth.
The rebounds, was it?
And he just curled it with his right
off the post, wasn't it?
Foot, his weaker right foot off the post. Just sheer moments of genius. But it all kind of feels like a fever dream now. It all feels like it kind of devalued. It didn't really happen.
It sort of feel like a reserve game, those reserve games, and was it just
that's
crazy?
What it felt like. That's probably the closest comparison. You would hear just about everything the players were saying, and particularly Conor Cody's booming voice whenever he came to Goodison. So that gave you journalistically an interesting insight for a couple of weeks into who was the loudest, what kind of things they were saying sometimes, tactical instruction, all those kinds of things. But after a few weeks, the novelty of that wears off quite quickly. And what you want is you want it to go back to football as the way it always was, which is with fans in the stadium, they make the game, they make the atmosphere, the players revel in the interaction with fans, often, particularly when Goodison's at its best. So it's just it was a poor imitation of Premier League football as we know it, I'd say.
I remember going to the I was fortunate to get a ticket. It opens up 4 times on the ballot, and I got the Wolves in May. And I was so excited to see James Rodriguez, and he didn't play. No. You're one of few who's seen him. What was you like to watch? Because I know some people at the club, and they was like, his ball control and his space and stuff, he was just unbelievable.
I mean, you could see that there was a top player in there, I'd kind of, this is harsh, but I kind of like it, when you watch like a really good Legends match and you can tell like Zinedine Zidane was amazing, he still got the technique. I'd liken it a little bit to that. And again, it is harsh, purely because he had all the tricks in the world, but his body was at that stage even starting to fail him.
Yeah.
He wasn't able to contribute in the rest of play, out of possession, as much as anybody would have wanted, I guess. And he was picking up injuries with increasing regularity. But what he could do with the ball was just, it was incredible. I mean, this is a bizarre highlight to draw on, but one of the things I remember vividly about his time was just the way he brought the ball down out of the sky against Liverpool at Anfield in one really fluid motion, killed it, and then with the next, just perfectly weighted pass through to Richarlison.
In a split second.
It just made it look so easy. He just made everything look so easy. I know there were staff members and players that were just completely in awe of what he would do in training, more or less on a daily basis. Such was his technical ability. But there was also, by the way, when he was on the pitch, there was an acceptance that Everton were up against it because they were affected. He couldn't do the work that some of the others were doing. They had to find ways to compensate for him. Yeah. So, I mean, we look back to that period now, and again, like I say, it was like a fever dream. It was like it didn't happen. James Rodriguez was on Spellow Lane picking up bottles of Echo Falls. Carlo Ancelotti was on.
Was that real?
On Formby Beach, walking around. Richarlison on his husky on Crosby Beach.
It was crazy.
In his flip flops in kind of 8 degrees. And
when Carlo went to Bootle Strand.
Carlo in Bootle Strand, like just this stuff, like absolutely amazing. Yeah, like I say, the big shame is that A, that fans didn't get to see it, but also B, that team didn't follow through on its promise, and they went from looking like they were going to qualify for either the Champions League or Europa League to, I think, finishing outside the top half, finishing 11th, which was actually a gross disappointment if you think about it. Yeah,
it just went crazy. That's a really good question, Casey. Thanks for that. We've got another one on Twitter from Danny. So Danny's opinion, and he says this is, he says, I don't rate Beto, and I'm fearful of what the injury has done to Brozier. Do you think Everton will still have to be tempted by any money that's on the table for Calvert-Lewin in January? I think we need to keep him at all costs.
Personal opinion, but yes, they will have to at least consider offers for Calvert-Lewin, I think, purely because of the financial predicament. Mm-hmm. I guess there would have to be a suitable offer, and there'd be a level below where you might think about it. Is this worth sacrificing a player like him for this amount of money?
Yeah.
On some occasions, the answer may well be no. But if a big, decent, sizable offer came in, then they may well look to do it. I think a lot will depend on, A, how Beto does over the coming weeks and months, but also how Brozier recovers. Mm-hmm. Because I see this season, with Calvert-Lewin out of contract at the end of the campaign, as a sort of dress rehearsal for Brozier.
Yeah.
There's an option to buy him, but it's not an obligation.
Yeah.
And it's long been seen as the long-term successor to Calvert-Lewin. Frank wanted him when he was here. They came close to getting him that summer, but they couldn't quite pull it off, and they've liked him for all that time. But can he take that next step, which is stay fit and show his worth within this Dyche setup? As it is now, there's still a question mark there. So let's see. We don't know what's going to come back because there's no evidence to suggest he will be the same player or he won't be even. Just going on Beto, I mean, there's a bit of negativity in the question about his performance, and I understand that. I think he's worse when he comes off the bench than when he starts. I think when he comes off the bench, he seems to be one of those players that takes much longer to get up to speed. He almost looks like a bit of a rabbit in the headlights, and Everton lose some control as a result. Some of the other performances, Doncaster admittedly, but I thought he was much better from the start against them, even just with the way he was holding on to the ball and holding off kind of these big bruising defenders from League Two. He's far from proved himself. I think there would be a concern if Calvert-Lewin was to go and Beto was to lead the line for the rest of the season. There certainly would be in my eyes. But that's why a lot's going to rest on Brozier too, I think. And also the right offer coming in. You're not going to sell Calvert-Lewin for $2 million just because he's out of contract. You'd rather keep him, wouldn't you? Yeah. Even that makes more financial sense.
Yeah, it does. EFC picks on Instagram. Would you like to see any events at Goodison Park between now and next summer? And he's actually said, i.e. Legends games and concerts.
Yep. both of those two things. I think we will see concerts, won't we? By the sounds of things from what the club said. I'm actually also, I mean, Goodison, getting the farewell from Goodison right is pivotal.
Yeah,
and the club will be working around the clock to ensure that, I believe. The introduction to Bramley Moore, equally so. And what are the concerts? One of the things I'm thinking about is who could open. Who could be the first concert of Bramley Moore? Could you get like a big bold headliner there to?
Could you get Paul McCartney to do both in the same summer?
Well, Paul McCartney to be the one to do Bramley Moore would be
in the summer.
Would be incredible.
On the banks of the Royal Blue Mersey,
Yeah, I mean, so there will be both those things. There'll be farewell events for Goodison. There'll be, I'm sure there'll be games. I'm sure there'll be kind of events in the Gladys Street as had been billed before.
Yeah.
That'll come back in some capacity.
Yeah.
There will be concerts and everything else. Same at Bramley Moore. What we also have to remember is that, in theory, the construction of Bramley Moore is done at the end of this
You can start
year.
using it,
So you can start using it. And one of the things Everton have to do, I think they have to do 3 test events before they officially, it passes its safety certificate in quotation marks, and they can move in. I would have thought as a guess that some of those will be, for example, like an under-21s or a women's game, things like that. So we may get an insight into what it's like, all of us, before actually the first Premier League game this time next season, just under 12 months. It's mad, isn't it?
It's crazy how fast it's come round. I've been driving to go to my job in the city centre. I've been driving past Bramley Moor since it started, peeking over the walls, and now it's here.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit. We've done a great show on the Legion of Goodison with a couple of big blues from Interman Radio, and they said they'd love to see Camel Fat do Goodison. They're 2 big blues.
I could see that as well, because they are massive Evertonians. I think that would go down really well.
Yeah, it would. A couple more questions, then we'll let you go. Really appreciate your time, Paddy. Eddie on Twitter is asking, with our seemingly new model of what we're doing in a transfer window, which is selling an asset and reinvesting it, coupled with a squad of only 12 contracted players next summer, have we now got to sell Jordan Pickford or Jared Branthwaite next summer?
I wouldn't say got to sell, but I think the description of the model as it is right now and as it has been is correct. If you look at it historically over the last few years, Amadou Onana went over the summer, and I think the club fought to keep Jared Branthwaite, but we're always willing to listen to the right offer for Amadou. Anthony Gordon's gone, Richarlison's gone. A lot of those were not only cash flow things, potential remedies for cash flow, but also obviously to resolve PSR. Ben Godfrey and Lewis Dobbin hopefully have made a big difference there. The club think they're on the right side of the PSR line for last season because of those deals. I think Branthwaite, if he has another season like last, will again come under
100%
sustained pressure next season, won't he? And I'd be surprised if it was just Manchester United, because every club in the world needs a 6'4", rapid, ball-playing, left-sided centre-back, don't they?
And Carlo loved him, didn't he, as well?
Carlo loved him. I mean, I remember writing a piece on Jared's early days at Everton, and it was actually Davide Ancelotti that saw him play. I think it was against Leicester for Everton under 23s as it was then. He promoted him right up to the first team. So that's quite an endorsement when you look at what Davide Ancelotti's done in the game so far. Load should be interested in him. I actually think it would, for a number of reasons, but for Everton, but also just for him personally, I think it would have been a big shame if he'd ended up at Manchester United this summer, because I think he can do better when he eventually goes. I mean, they, to me, don't look like they're going to be competing at the top end of the table, and I think Branthwaite's got the potential to play for anyone. So I think he will come under sustained focus again. Let's see if anybody gets close, because Everton have been quite open, haven't they, publicly? If the right offer comes in at the right price, then they have to consider selling anyone in their financial situation as it is right now.
Yeah.
What we don't know, I suppose, is what happens to the recruitment strategy and everything else once the Freidkins are in place. Do they say, actually, well, no, we don't want to sell a player every summer? We want to keep our best players and build around them. We don't know.
Does the potential new naming rights deal stop this? You know what I mean? There's ways to bring money in, and I think it's a really good question there that Eddie said, because 12 outfield players Everton have to go and buy.
Yeah, they need money. They need money, and they will also. It won't just be as simple as the Freidkins writing a cheque potentially for 200 million and going, there you go, lads, go and sign 6 players or 7 players. Mm-hmm. They will have to wheel and deal. They will have to bring in money for PSR purposes.
Yeah,
and everything else. So let's see where that takes Everton. They made a decision over the summer that they could rectify PSR and rectify their other issues without selling Jarrod Branthwaite. And that was Onana, it was Ben Godfrey, and it was Lewis Dobbin. You give up things to keep your prized asset. Yeah. Let's see the decisions that are made next summer, because I think because of the takeover situation and where it is now, everything's still kind of in the open there, isn't it?
Yeah. Last question for you. We got so many, so thank you so much for the questions. And this is just to end it on you again as both an Evertonian and a journalist. So Gaz on Twitter, what has been the toughest story to research, write and report on in relation to Everton, as you are an Evertonian? On the flip side, what has been the best as well?
Let's start with the worst and we can try and end with the positive. Yeah. There were loads of tough stories for different reasons. The first thing that springs to mind when I started doing the job, when I'd have to go in really kind of granular detail into the accounts and effectively have to school myself overnight on football finance, accounting principles, all those kinds of stuff. That at first was difficult to get my head around, but after doing it for 4, 5, 6 years, you get to a position where it becomes easier and you worry about it less. The toughest stories are the ones where you're less confident in what you're being told by people. And like, so for example, when you've got a situation where John Textor is very publicly speaking about Everton and what he can and can't do, and bigging up his chances of taking over the club, and then you've got Farhad Moshiri, who's got his own vested interests in that situation, penetrating the noise and actually getting to what is actually going on becomes much tougher. So I would say that those stories tend to be the most difficult. The best stories, I think, are always the ones around kind of big marquee moments and key signings. I mean, I loved reporting on the Merseyside derby last season and that win, because it was just such a big night, such a euphoric night, and just an evening where Everton kind of trampled all over Liverpool, really bullied them, and kind of I've still got that image in my head, and I think it's the metaphor for the game of Calvert-Lewin just perched on top of 2 Liverpool defenders at the back post, ready to head in. That was the kind of the symbolic moment from the game. Other things I've enjoyed, like I mean, just going to Carlo Ancelotti's first press conference at Goodison as it was then. Just on the way to the game thinking, I'm going to cover Carlo Ancelotti's first press conferences as Everton manager. And then we get there, he's doing his photos on the side of the pitch, and we're all kind of trying to get a view of him. It's a big event. We're all trying to get a view of him and take our pictures and videos and everything else. And then Marcel Brands comes over and he's like kind of shouting at us to get off the pitch and stuff as we're going on, that kind of stuff. And then just interviewing people that you either grew up watching or that you, if you're in the terraces yourself, would be cheering on, speaking to new signings, being privileged to go on these tours in pre-season where the access usually is much better. We get to speak to key figures of the club on the record. And then, like for example, when we went to Baltimore for Everton's game against Arsenal a couple of years ago under Frank, we walk into a room and there's like 3,000 Evertonians from different parts of the globe, and particularly the US. And I'd go up and speak to people and be, I'm from Nashville and I support Everton. I'm from Oregon and I support Everton. It just completely blew my mind, but absolutely loved it. So it gives you great opportunities. You go to different stadiums, you experience different managers, different directors of football, their ways of working. But it's always better when the club you follow is doing well. So if Everton pick up, then my job picks up as well. My job's a lot easier. Well,
let's hope the second part of that question is it's still to come.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. It's been so great. We've done just an hour with you, Paddy. It's been great to have you in. You've done another brilliant article today. I'm not just saying it because you're here. Whenever I see you tweeting an article, I'm excited to read it. It's always knowledgeable, and you can tell you're an Evertonian as well, which I'm not sure whether there's a compliment or not, but I feel like an Evertonian is caring behind it. So thanks for joining Across the Park podcast.
No, pleasure.
Thanks, guys, for watching. There's a couple of buttons down below which I really hope that you press. One is called like. The other one is called share. Put it in your WhatsApp group. There's also a notification button. If you press that, all our future shows will be sent straight to your device that you watch them on. It really, really helps us to keep amazing places like the Pod Cafe going. Our sponsors, as always, thank you to Globe Gas and Heating. Big shout out to our friends over at Alfie Squad, doing some amazing things lately. We're going to be talking to them soon. And I ask anyone who knows my little boy from this show, he is the mascot for Everton Women versus Manchester United Women on Sunday, streaming live on the Women's Super League. Please give that a watch. He's so excited for it, and he's been on the show before, but like I said at the start, it's been nice to come in and speak to a great guest and feel good about Everton for a change. The button's being reset. We'll be back next week reviewing the Crystal Palace game. Thank you, and up them toffees.